I want you to think about the last time you walked through a grocery store and felt genuinely comfortable with what you saw. Not just the prices, though those have been doing something alarming for the past few years, and anyone pretending otherwise isn't paying their own bills. I mean the feeling underneath the prices. The feeling that everything you need to feed yourself and your family is sitting behind a supply chain you have absolutely no control over, managed by companies that have no particular interest in your well-being, priced by forces that have nothing to do with what food actually costs to grow. That feeling is not paranoia, it's pattern recognition, and more people are feeling it every single season. The average American household now spends a meaningfully larger portion of its income on food than it did 5 years ago. Shrinkflation has made the packages smaller while the prices climbed. Supply disruptions that used to be rare events have become something we plan around. And the produce section specifically sells you vegetables that were picked days or weeks before they reach the shelf. Bred for shipping durability rather than nutrition, grown in industrial conditions that prioritize uniformity over actual food quality. You already know this. That's why you're here. But here's where most food independence content loses people. It assumes you have land. It assumes you have money for raised beds and soil and seeds and all the infrastructure that gardening culture has decided is necessary before you're allowed to start. It assumes you're a homeowner with a backyard and a budget for setup costs. What if you're renting? What if you have a balcony and a fire escape and a strip of concrete outside your door? What if your budget for starting a garden is genuinely close to zero? Are you just locked out of food independence until your circumstances change? No, you are not. And that is exactly what this video is going to prove to you. Today we're building a real food garden from recycled containers that most people throw away. No purchased pots, no raised bed kits, no expensive setup, 10 crops that produce serious food in the containers you can find for free right now, in the space you already have, starting this season. If this is the kind of content you've been looking for, practical, no budget, no land food independence that works in the real world, you're in the right place. This is Evergreen Home Living, and we exist for exactly this. Subscribe right now and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it. The gardening industry has a vested interest in making you believe that starting a garden is complicated and expensive. Think about what that industry sells. Decorative pots, proprietary soil mixes, branded seed starting kits, raised bed systems that cost several $100s before you've put a single plant in them, fertilizer programs, drip irrigation setups. The entire ecosystem of products surrounding home gardening is built on the premise that you need to purchase your way into growing food. That premise is historically false. For most of human history, people grew food in whatever containers were available: clay pots fired from local earth, hollowed logs, woven baskets lined with clay, wooden barrels that previously held something else, cracked ceramic vessels that could no longer hold water but could hold soil. The concept of purchasing a container specifically designed for growing plants is a modern invention. The concept of growing plants in containers is ancient. What plants actually need is not a purchased container. They need a vessel that holds soil, allows some drainage, provides adequate depth for the root system, and doesn't leach toxic compounds into the growing medium. That's the complete list. Any object that meets those 4 criteria is a legitimate growing container. And when you look at what gets thrown away in any neighborhood, any week, you start to see containers everywhere. Your container guide. Before we get to the crops, let's talk about what you're actually looking for and what you're avoiding, because not every recycled container is safe for food production. Food-grade plastic buckets are your most versatile and available option. These are the 5-gallon buckets that come from restaurant supply, bakeries, delis, and food service operations. Restaurants go through enormous quantities of these. Pickle buckets, frosting buckets, sauce buckets. Most restaurants will give them away for free rather than pay disposal fees. Look for the recycling symbol with the number 2, 4, or 5 inside it. Those numbers indicate food-safe plastics. Drill 5 to 7 holes in the bottom for drainage, and you have a perfect growing container. Wooden crates and fruit boxes, the kind used to ship produce to markets and grocery stores, are free from most produce suppliers and farmers markets at the end of the day. Line them with a single layer of landscape fabric or even newspaper before filling with soil to prevent soil loss through the gaps while still allowing drainage. Old dresser drawers and wooden boxes from furniture being discarded are excellent for shallow-rooted crops. Check your neighborhood on trash day. Check free listings online. Check the back of secondhand stores. Untreated wood is safe. Avoid wood that has been treated with preservatives, which can leach compounds into soil and into your food. Plastic storage totes, the kind sold for organizing closets, are given away constantly on free community boards when people move or reorganize. They're deep, they're wide, and they hold a substantial volume of soil. Drill drainage holes and they become excellent large volume growing containers. Old colanders, large cooking pots, metal tubs, ceramic sinks pulled from bathroom renovations. If it holds soil and you can create drainage, it grows food. What to avoid? Car tires, even though you see them used as planters frequently, can leach concerning compounds into soil over time, particularly in heat. Treated lumber, identifiable by a greenish tint or chemical smell, contains preservatives that don't belong near food crops. Containers that previously held non-food chemicals, motor oil, cleaning products, paint. If you don't know what was in it before, don't grow food in it. Now, depth. This is the practical detail that determines whether your container crop succeeds or struggles. Shallow containers 6 to 8 inches deep work for lettuce, spinach, herbs, radishes, and green onions. Medium containers 10 to 12 inches deep work for kale, Swiss chard, bush beans, and strawberries. Deep containers 14 inches or more work for tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and root vegetables like carrots and beets. The 5-gallon bucket is your workhorse because at roughly 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide, it hits the medium to deep range that covers the majority of productive food crops. Now let's talk about the 10 crops. Crop 1. Kale. Kale is the first crop on this list because it makes the strongest possible argument for container growing to a skeptic. One kale plant in a 10-inch deep container will produce edible leaves for 6 to 8 months of the year in most climates. Not one harvest. Continuous harvest over the better part of a year from a single container. Here's how kale outperforms what you buy at the store. Grocery store kale was harvested days ago, shipped in a refrigerated truck, and stored in a display case. Studies on nutrient degradation in leafy greens show that significant vitamin loss occurs within the first 24 to 48 hours after harvest. The kale you're buying has already lost a meaningful portion of the nutrition it was grown for. The kale you harvest from your balcony 30 seconds before it goes into your pan has lost nothing. Kale is cold hardy to a degree that most vegetables can't match. It survives frost and actually improves in flavor after cold exposure, as the plant converts starches to sugars in response to freezing temperatures. This means your kale container keeps producing deep into autumn and through mild winters when every other container has shut down for the season. Container requirements: 10 to 12 inches deep, 1 plant per 5-gallon bucket, or 3 to 4 plants in a wider, shallower wooden crate. Harvest the outer leaves continuously, leaving the central growing point intact. Feed occasionally with diluted compost tea if you have it. If you don't, kale will produce without it, just at a slightly reduced rate. From a survival food perspective, kale is calorie light but nutrient dense in a way that matters when your diet is under stress. Vitamins A, C, and K in significant quantities. Calcium, iron, antioxidants. 1 meal's worth of kale from your own container delivers more functional nutrition than most of what's in the produce section, and it costs you nothing after the initial seed investment. Crop 2. Sweet potatoes. This one surprises people every time. Sweet potatoes in containers. It sounds like too much plant for too small a space. But here's what most people don't know about sweet potatoes. The leaves are edible too, and in much of the world, the greens are considered just as valuable as the roots. You're not just growing a root vegetable, you're growing a dual-purpose food plant that produces edible material from the day you plant it until the day you harvest the roots. Sweet potato vines in a container will cascade beautifully over the sides and can spread across a balcony floor or a fire escape landing, using horizontal space that isn't being used for anything else. The vines themselves function as living mulch if they trail onto soil, suppressing weeds in any ground-level containers nearby. The roots develop in whatever container you give them. Larger containers mean larger roots. A 5-gallon bucket will produce a modest root harvest. A large plastic storage tote, the kind people give away constantly, will produce a genuinely substantial harvest from a single plant. Start from slips, which are the vine cuttings that grow from a sweet potato placed in water. Buy 1 sweet potato from the grocery store, preferably an organic one since conventional sweet potatoes are sometimes treated to inhibit sprouting. Place it halfway in a jar of water, and within 2 to 3 weeks you'll have multiple slips ready to plant. One grocery store sweet potato becomes dozens of plants. You never need to buy starts. Container requirements: 14 inches deep minimum. The largest container you can source for maximum root production. Plant after your last frost date. Harvest when the leaves begin to yellow in autumn. From a survival standpoint, sweet potatoes are one of the most calorie-dense crops you can grow in a container. They provide complex carbohydrates, significant vitamin A from the orange flesh, and the greens provide protein at levels unusual for a leafy vegetable. This is a genuine food security crop, not a specialty item. Crop 3. Bush beans. If you need to understand why bush beans belong on a survival container garden list, think about what beans represent in food history. They are one of the oldest cultivated crops on Earth. They were half of the dietary foundation of the Americas before European contact. They fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, meaning they fertilize themselves and the containers around them simultaneously, and they produce prolifically in a relatively small space with minimal care. Bush beans, specifically, are the container-appropriate version, because they don't require staking or trellising the way pole beans do. They grow to about 18 inches tall, produce a concentrated harvest over 3 to 4 weeks, and then you pull the plants, add them to compost, and replant for a second or even third crop in the same container the same season. The protein content of fresh beans, and especially dried beans if you let some pods mature fully on the plant, makes them nutritionally distinct from most container crops. In a scenario where your grocery access is limited or expensive, having a container that produces protein rather than just vitamins and minerals changes the equation significantly. Container requirements: 10 to 12 inches deep, 6 to 8 seeds per 5-gallon bucket, planted 2 inches deep. Thin to the strongest 4 or 5 plants after germination. Keep consistently moist during pod formation. Harvest pods young and continuously to extend production. The free container angle here is particularly practical. A single wooden produce crate from a farmer's market, lined with newspaper and filled with soil, will grow enough bush beans in one season to meaningfully supplement your household protein intake. Cost at setup: 0, assuming you have or can source seeds. Crop 4. Lettuce and salad greens. Lettuce is the crop that makes the economics of container gardening most immediately obvious. A single head of organic lettuce at a grocery store costs between $2 and $4 in most markets right now. A packet of lettuce seed costs roughly the same amount and contains enough seed to produce dozens of heads across multiple containers over multiple seasons. But the economics get even more interesting than that when you grow lettuce in containers using the cut and come again method. Rather than growing lettuce to full head size and harvesting the entire plant, you sow seeds densely, let them grow to 3 or 4 inches, and then harvest the outer leaves continuously while the plant keeps producing from the center. One container of cut and come again lettuce can provide fresh salad greens for 6 to 8 weeks before the plants bolt and need replacing. And lettuce is one of the few crops that genuinely prefers the contained, controlled environment of a container over ground planting in many situations. Containers allow you to move the lettuce out of direct midday sun in hot weather, extending the productive season significantly. Lettuce bolts, turns bitter, and goes to seed when temperatures consistently exceed a certain threshold, but if you can move your container to a shadier spot during peak summer heat, you extend your harvest window by weeks. Container requirements: 6 to 8 inches deep is sufficient. This is the crop for your shallowest recycled containers. Old dresser drawers, wooden fruit flats, plastic storage lids, even large food cans with drainage holes drilled in the bottom work for lettuce. Grow multiple varieties simultaneously. A spicy mix that includes arugula, mustard greens, and mizuna alongside traditional lettuce varieties gives you a more nutritionally complex and flavorful harvest than anything available in a standard grocery store salad bag. Crop 5. Tomatoes. Tomatoes are on this list not because they're unusual, but because they're so universally desired and so poorly represented by what the grocery store sells that growing your own in a container represents one of the most dramatic quality improvements available in home food production. The tomatoes in your grocery store were bred for one thing: surviving the journey from industrial farm to retail shelf intact and visually appealing. Flavor, nutrition, and texture were secondary considerations in that breeding program. The result is a tomato that looks like a tomato and tastes like a suggestion of one. A container-grown tomato harvested at full ripeness, still warm from the sun, is a completely different food. The flavor difference between a vine-ripened homegrown tomato and a grocery store: Tomato is not subtle. It is the difference between a food and a memory of that food. For containers, choose determinate varieties, also called bush tomatoes, which grow to a fixed size rather than continuing to vine indefinitely. Varieties like Patio, Bush Early Girl, Tumbling Tom, or Glacier are specifically suited to container growing and produce substantial harvests in a 5-gallon bucket or larger container. Container requirements: 14 inches deep minimum, but the bigger, the better. A 5-gallon bucket will grow 1 determinate tomato plant. A large plastic storage tote will grow 2 or 3. Stake or cage the plants as they grow. Water consistently because uneven watering causes blossom, end rot, and fruit cracking. A handful of crushed eggshells mixed into the soil at planting provides calcium that prevents blossom end rot without any purchased amendment. From a survival standpoint, tomatoes in peak season can produce more fruit than a single household can consume fresh, creating an opportunity for preservation. Canned, dried, or made into sauce, the surplus from a few container tomato plants extends your food security beyond the growing season. Crop 6. Swiss chard. Swiss chard is criminally underrepresented in mainstream gardening content, and the reason is the same reason most genuinely useful plants get ignored. It doesn't photograph as dramatically as a tomato, and it doesn't market as easily as a trendy superfood, even though it absolutely qualifies as one. Here's what chard does that almost no other container crop matches. It produces edible material continuously from early spring through hard frost, a production window of 7 to 9 months in most temperate climates. It tolerates heat that wilts lettuce and cold that damages most other greens. It regrows after cutting with the same vigor every time. And it provides a nutritional profile, high in vitamins A, C, and K, with meaningful amounts of magnesium and potassium, that makes it a serious dietary contribution, rather than a garnish. The stems and leaves are both edible and can be prepared differently. Young leaves go raw into salads. Mature leaves are cooked like spinach. The thick stems, particularly on rainbow chard varieties, are cooked like asparagus or added to stir-fries. One plant gives you multiple ingredients from the same container. Container requirements: 10 to 12 inches deep, 2 to 3 plants per 5-gallon bucket. Harvest outer leaves when they reach 6 to 8 inches, leaving the central rosette to keep producing. In mild climates, chard will overwinter in containers and begin producing again early the following spring, making it one of the few crops that bridges 2 growing seasons. The free container option that works particularly well for chard is the large plastic storage tote. 3 to 4 chard plants in a single large tote will supply a household with continuous cooking greens through most of the year. The visual alone, particularly the multicolored stems of rainbow chard varieties, makes it one of the more striking container plantings available, which matters if your containers are on a balcony or visible from the street. Crop 7. Green onions and perennial bunching onions. This is the crop that demonstrates most clearly how container gardening can eliminate a specific grocery store purchase entirely and permanently. Green onions in a container can be harvested continuously using a method that turns one purchase or one packet of seeds into an indefinite supply. When you harvest green onions, cut them about an inch above the soil rather than pulling the entire plant. The roots and base remain in the container and regrow new shoots within 10 to 14 days. A single container of green onions, maintained this way, supplies fresh alliums year-round with no replanting required. Perennial bunching onions, varieties like Evergreen Hardy White or Hishiko, take this further. They're not just regrowable, they're genuinely perennial, dividing and multiplying over time so that one original planting becomes an increasingly dense and productive clump that you divide every year or two to create new containers. The practical impact of this on your grocery budget is real and immediate. Green onions are purchased regularly by most households in small quantities. They're often the item you buy for one recipe and then watch wilt in your refrigerator before you use them again. A container of perennial bunching onions eliminates that purchase entirely, replaces it with a snip and walk back inside harvest, and costs nothing after the initial planting. Container requirements: 6 to 8 inches deep. This is another crop for shallow containers. 12 to 15 plants in a 5-gallon bucket, planted an inch apart. They don't mind crowding. The container equivalent of a densely planted herb pot, functionally. Crop 8. Peppers. Peppers are on this list for a reason that goes beyond their obvious culinary value. In a food independence context, hot peppers specifically have a utility that extends beyond the kitchen. Dried hot peppers are a preservable, tradable, multi-use food product that keeps for years without refrigeration. A surplus of dried hot peppers represents stored caloric flavor, natural pest deterrent when made into spray, and a trade good in any scenario where informal food exchange becomes relevant. But the immediate value is simpler. Fresh peppers, both sweet and hot, are expensive at retail relative to their actual production cost. A single pepper plant in a container, given adequate sun and consistent water, will produce more fruit in a season than most households can use fresh, creating that preservation opportunity. Peppers are actually well adapted to container growing because they prefer warm root zones, and containers sitting on a sun-warmed surface stay warmer than ground soil. In regions with short growing seasons, this container warmth advantage can mean the difference between a productive pepper plant and one that barely fruits before frost ends the season. Container requirements: 12 to 14 inches deep. 1 plant per 5-gallon bucket. Peppers are heavy feeders compared to other crops on this list, so if you have access to compost, mix it generously into the container soil. If you don't, diluted compost tea made from any available organic matter, including kitchen scraps, supports pepper production reasonably well. Choose varieties appropriate to your use. For sweet peppers, compact varieties like Baby Bell or lunchbox types produce prolifically in containers. For hot peppers, cayenne and Thai hot varieties are particularly productive per square inch of container space and dry beautifully for long-term storage. Crop 9. Radishes. Radishes are the crop that proves you can produce real food from a container in less than a month. 25 to 30 days from seed to harvest for fast varieties like Cherry Bell or French Breakfast. That speed has profound implications for anyone new to container gardening who needs to see results to stay motivated, and for anyone in a situation where quick food production matters more than long-term planning. But radishes are more than a fast crop. They are a soil management tool in container gardening. Their roots break up compacted soil in containers, improving the structure for whatever crop follows them. They can be interplanted with slower crops, growing in the spaces between young tomato or pepper plants, and harvested before those plants need the space. They use container real estate that would otherwise be empty. The greens are also edible and nutritious, which means when you pull a radish, you're getting 2 foods from 1 plant. Young radish greens are mild enough for salads. Mature greens are slightly spicy and work well in stir-fries or sautéed with oil and garlic. Container requirements: 6 to 8 inches deep. Sow densely, about an inch apart, and thin to 2 inches after germination, eating the thinnings as microgreens. In a single wooden fruit crate, you can grow enough radishes for continuous harvesting if you sow new seeds every 2 weeks in the available spaces as you harvest. From a survival standpoint, radishes in containers represent the fastest possible path from seed to food. If your situation required you to start producing food quickly from materials you could gather for free, radishes are the crop you start on day 1. Crop 10. Strawberries. Strawberries complete this list because they address something that the other 9 crops don't: the psychological dimension of food independence. Producing food that feels like abundance, like pleasure, like more than mere subsistence, is important. It changes your relationship with your garden from something you do out of necessity into something you genuinely want to do. And that shift in relationship is what determines whether a container garden stays productive for 1 season or becomes a permanent feature of how you live. Strawberries in containers produce fruit that is categorically better than anything available at retail. Grocery store strawberries are picked underripe to survive shipping, which means the sugar development that happens in the final days of ripening on the plant never occurs. A strawberry picked fully ripe from your own container is not the same food as a grocery store strawberry. It's sweeter, more fragrant, more complex, and more nutritious. Ever-bearing varieties, which produce flushes of fruit in spring and again in autumn rather than a single spring harvest, are the container-appropriate choice. They're smaller plants than June-bearing varieties and produce over a longer season. Container requirements: 8 to 10 inches deep, 3 to 4 plants per 5-gallon bucket. Strawberries are actually well known as container crops and have been grown in hanging baskets and decorative planters for centuries. The difference here is growing them in a free recycled container rather than a purchased one. A wooden crate lined with landscape fabric and filled with good soil will grow a dozen strawberry plants that produce fruit across 2 seasons of the year. Runners, the horizontal stems that strawberry plants send out to propagate themselves, root readily into any soil-filled container you place next to the parent plant. Once you have strawberry plants, you have them indefinitely, propagating themselves into new containers without any cost or effort from you. Building your zero-cost container system. Let's put this together practically, because the goal of this video was never just to give you a list. It was to show you a complete, functional system that works right now with what you have. Start with containers. This week, before you buy anything or plant anything, spend one afternoon identifying every free container source within reach of where you live. Restaurant supply pickups, which you can arrange simply by calling local restaurants and asking if they have food-grade buckets available. Produce suppliers and farmers markets at closing time. Free listings online. Neighborhood trash days, particularly in areas where people are moving or cleaning out storage. You are looking for food-safe plastic buckets, wooden crates, plastic storage totes, and any deep-sided vessel that can hold soil and have drainage added. A realistic target for 1 week of container sourcing with zero budget, 10 to 15 usable containers of various sizes. That is enough to grow every crop on this list. Next, soil. The one input this system genuinely requires is a growing medium. Purchased potting mix is the simplest solution if it's within your budget, but it's not the only solution. A mix of garden soil, homemade compost, and any organic matter you can source, aged wood chips, leaf mold, well-rotted manure, produces a functional growing medium. Community gardens often have compost available. Municipalities in many areas give away free compost. Stables and urban farms sometimes offer aged manure at no cost. Then seeds. A small seed investment goes further in a container garden than almost anywhere else because containers concentrate your growing space, and the crops on this list were specifically chosen for high productivity per square foot. If budget is a genuine concern, prioritize seeds for kale, lettuce, Swiss chard, bush beans, and radishes. These 5 crops provide nutritional range, continuous production across the season, and sufficient yield to meaningfully supplement your food intake. The remaining 5 crops, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, strawberries, and bunching onions, can be started from grocery store produce, free divisions from other growers, or community plant swaps, reducing or eliminating the seed cost entirely. The independence message. I want to finish this video with something that goes deeper than gardening advice. What we've been talking about today is not a hobby. It's not an aesthetic choice. It's not content for people who have extra time and disposable income to spend on a wholesome lifestyle pursuit. What we've been talking about is the most ancient and fundamental form of human self-determination, the ability to feed yourself. That ability was not taken from most people in a single dramatic moment. It was dissolved gradually, over generations, by a food system that made dependency convenient and self-sufficiency seem unnecessary. Why grow food when the store is right there? Why learn these skills when everything you need is a shopping trip away? The answer to that question has become more obvious every year. The store is right there until it isn't. The prices are manageable until they aren't. The supply chain is reliable until it isn't. And the people who have no alternative to that system, no skills, no containers, no seeds, no knowledge, are the most vulnerable when any part of it fails. You are not building a backup plan. You are building a primary relationship with food that doesn't require permission, doesn't require debt, doesn't require a particular zip code or a particular income level or a particular piece of land. A balcony with 10 recycled containers growing the crops from today's video produces real food. Not survival rations, not emergency provisions. Real food, fresh food, food that tastes better than what you can buy, that costs less than what you're currently spending, and that connects you to a cycle of production and nourishment that your grandparents understood and that you are reclaiming right now. The containers you're going to find this week are not trash. They are the beginning of something that makes you less dependent on a system that has never had your food security as its priority. Start this week, not when conditions are perfect, not when you have more time or more money or more space. This week, with what you have and what you can source for free. The food system is not going to become more stable or more affordable on its own, but your relationship with food can change starting today with nothing more than a free bucket, a handful of soil, and the decision that you're done waiting for permission to feed yourself. That decision is yours. Make it.